Quinn woke to sounds in the next cavern. For a few glorious seconds he stared at the ceiling, ignoring the thoughts clamoring at the edges of his brain. He had slept unexpectedly well. For the first time in a week his dreams felt steady rather than urgent, and he had woken slowly instead of being ripped from sleep. Quinn rubbed his head, still not quite able to believe that he was in a different place. Everything Ellie had told him seemed impossible, and yet, as he turned it over in his mind, staring at the green bulbs on the ceiling, his gut told him that it was true. Besides, the air here tasted different somehow. Quinn wasn't sure where that left him. He felt strangely disconnected from the information, like his brain hadn't quite caught up yet. But beneath that, if he looked more closely, he could feel something burning in his stomach, could taste acid in his mouth, because if everything Ellie said was true, then someone on Ellipsom must know what calling really was. And if anyone on Ellipsom knew the truth about calling, his mother definitely knew. And yet she encouraged calling, mandated it even. Why would she do that? Why hadn't she stopped it altogether? The thought of his mother sent a current of panic through him. He wondered where she thought he was. Quinn traced his palm, which still seemed to be tingling from the bonds Ellie had used. He had to work out what was happening and what he was going to do. If he spent too long thinking about his family intentionally pillaging an entire continent for everything it was worth. "You're awake!" Quinn looked over. Ellie was standing in the doorway holding a pile of clothes. "Good," she said, before he could answer. "We need to get going." "Now?" said Quinn, looking down at the blankets covering him. "I need to show you," said Ellie, "and I need to do it before the field gets too busy." Quinn pushed himself up to look at her. He didn't know what the fields were, but he figured he would find out soon enough. "Fresh laundry?" he asked, gesturing to the pile in her hand. "So you don't stand out too much," said Ellie. She tossed the clothes to Quinn and grinned when he caught them. "Thank you," he said. Ellie nodded. "Come through when you're dressed," she said. Quinn shook his head as she left. She was bossier than Davinia. The thought caught him before he could stop it, and the acid in his throat rose. Did his sister know? He pushed the thought out of his head, then looked at the soft brown trousers and cream shirt made from a thin material he didn't think he'd felt before. Getting up and seeing the land would stop him from lying in bed going over the same information until it wore a hole in him. And he found that, for all he was apprehensive about what he might learn, he was desperate to explore Avantra. He pulled on the clothes and patted down his hair, which was sticking out at all sorts of strange angles. Then he took a deep breath and walked through into the next cavern. Ellie and Marcus were sitting together on the floor by the large tree stump that served as a table, murmuring to each other in low voices. They stopped when Quinn entered and looked up, Ellie's gaze assessing and Marcus's slightly less sharp than it had been the previous day. "Good morning," Quinn said to Marcus. "Good morning, Quintus." Marcus pushed a bowl toward Quinn. "Thank you," said Quinn, slowly lowering himself down beside Ellie. In his bowl were small blue cubes and pink fronds. Quinn cleared his throat. "I've never seen food like this," he said. "What is it? It looks wonderful." "Avantran specialty," said Ellie. "It's safe to eat," she added, just as he was about to take a bite. Marcus covered a smile when Quinn paused. Tentatively, Quinn bit into one of the blue cubes. Flavor exploded on his tongue as it burst, like blueberries and watermelon all at once. He swallowed, warmth traveling through him. When the sensation passed, his mind felt clearer, more focused somehow. Next he tried one of the fronds, and an unexpected smoothness ran down his throat, as though he was drinking a glass of cold milk. What was this food? He looked up at Ellie and Marcus, but neither of them met his eyes, and Quinn held his tongue. He was a guest in their home. Besides, it seemed like he would have plenty of time to ask Ellie questions later. Every mouthful was incredible, whatever the food was, but he ate quickly, trying to ignore Ellie tapping the table as he did. As soon as Quinn finished, she stood to her feet. "Thank you for breakfast," said Quinn, looking at Marcus. "You have a lovely home." Years of making conversation as the son of a diplomat made the words feel trite, but Quinn genuinely meant them. Despite Marcus's skepticism and all the strange furnishings, the cave felt more like a home than his actual home. "Thank you," said Marcus, his voice warm. "I like the tree stumps," said Quinn, resting his hand on the edge of the table. "Luckily for us, tree stump seats aren't in high demand on Ellipsom," Marcus replied, and Quinn cursed his own thoughtlessness. If what Ellie had told him about calling was true, the disappearances are more predictable than they were historically, Marcus added after a moment, as though taking pity on him. Since the delegation, everything is organized, at least. Less random disappearances from homes, but they haven't stopped completely. So the caves, the stumps, they're just safer choices. There was resignation in his voice, and Quinn wondered what had gone missing over the years. He wondered if any of it was in his house. He thought of Dav's chair. He turned to see Ellie watching him, her eyes curious. She held his gaze for a moment, then turned back to her father. "We'll see you later today," she told him. "You'll cover me at the fields?" Marcus nodded. "Be careful," he said. He turned to Quinn and hesitated. "Both of you." An odd rush of warmth shot through Quinn at his words, and he nodded it to the older man, feeling strangely emotional. Marcus busied himself stacking the dishes. "What did you tell him about me?" asked Quinn quietly as they left. Allie looked back at him. "Nothing," she said. "I just asked him to trust me." She led Quinn to another door, where the beginnings of daylight were starting to seep in, and Quinn took a breath and steeled himself. But it didn't quite stop the beauty and familiarity of Avantra from hitting him in the gut when they emerged into it. Morning light filtered through trees and danced over rocks. A thin mist hung over the horizon, and Quinn could see droplets of water on the plants that sprang from the sides of the entrance to the cave. Quinn's fingers itched. He wished he had his pencil, his notebook, the desire to sketch, to write, or even to just sit with the familiar comfort of pencil in hand overwhelmed him. Allie pushed beside him. "It still makes me feel like that too," she said, so softly that Quinn wondered whether he'd imagined it. She started walking up a slope left of the cave, and Quinn almost had to run to keep up. The ground beneath their feet was still, the green lines stark in the morning light. Quinn was about to ask Allie about the lines when they reached the top of the ridge. Patches of green spread out before them, like the ones Quinn had seen the day before, but larger and more frequent. In the distance he could see two large shapes moving around, and beyond them a grey tower rose above the green. Quinn felt an uncomfortable twist in his chest at the sight. "These are the fields," said Allie, keeping her voice low as they started walking down the other side of the ridge toward one of the large green patches. "What's that?" Quinn asked, pointing to the grey tower in the distance. "Management," said Allie shortly, without looking up. "It's the Ellipsom base," she added tersely in response to Quinn's questioning look. "We'll go closer later, if we can." As they neared the fields, Quinn could see that there were rows and rows of fruits and vegetables hanging off vines and bursting from the ground. "Is all this food for Avantra?" Quinn asked quietly, somehow knowing in the pit of his stomach what her answer would be. "Quite the opposite," she frowned. "The fields were set up to ensure there's a ready supply of crops available to be called, and what is grown changes based on demands from Ellipsom." Quinn could hear the frustration in her voice. Everyone on Avantra is required by law to work. Most people do it in these fields, though there are others who scout and plant new fields across the continent, and some work at management. Everything for the good of Ellipsom. There's even a furnace that we keep constantly burning in case anyone from Ellipsom calls fire. "Last night you mentioned disappearances," said Quinn, his voice careful. Have there been many people who rebelled over the years? He could feel himself slipping deeper into Avantra with every question he asked. Ali sighed, her gaze drifting to the tower. Every couple of years there's someone who challenges the system. Management is quick to react. There hasn't been an outright war, if that's what you're asking. Management is too well equipped, and we haven't had the tools or the means to fight. Most people nowadays think we should be grateful that things are more ordered and less disappears unexpectedly. Something about the way she spoke reminded him of the Spurges, of Milo, who almost certainly didn't know the truth about calling but believed in something passionately, who stood for something. What did Quinn stand for, apart from a desire to fulfill expectations? The thought didn't sit comfortably. He cleared his throat and paused. On Ellipsum we have calling principles, he said, determined to contribute something to the conversation. What? said Ali, stopping alongside him. Calling principles, repeated Quinn. They're the guidelines that callers operate by. Things they are and aren't allowed to call, how regularly they're allowed to do it. They'd been invented to keep Avantra a secret, Quinn realized, tasting acid at the back of his throat. Ali was silent, considering. There was something like that on your piece of paper, she said. My paper? Said Quinn. What I know about calling, Ali recited. It's how I called you, she continued. She seemed more relaxed now that the conversation had shifted, but out in the open suited her somehow. I needed paper, and when I said that out loud, yours appeared. The smell of strawberries filled the air as they passed a new set of crops. Quinn breathed deeply, and the scent relaxed something in him. How did you get the other piece of paper? Quinn asked. Among the rest of the jumble in his mind, the circumstances of his arrival had been niggling at him. The one with my name? I was trying to get the rest of whoever's notes on calling, said Ali. You only had 3 points, and I thought there must be more, so I just kept calling paper. When your name arrived, the writing looked similar, so I tried saying your name the same way I'd said paper. Quinn was torn between laughing and sobbing. What were the chances of her getting that second piece of paper? There were hundreds of thousands of other pieces that could have arrived. I called paper for most of the day, she admitted, correctly reading his expression. All the material about calling says that conjuring a person from nothing is impossible, said Quinn. It's illegal on Ellipsum. Something tugged at the back of Quinn's head as he said the words, but when he tried to pull it into focus, it slipped out of his grasp again. He felt a surge of frustration at all the things he didn't know and stopped beside the field, taking a moment to breathe as he gazed through at the neat green plants bursting up in rows. Beside him was a vine, looping just above his head between wooden stakes. Quinn could see fruit beginning to bud. There was something about the line of it that steadied him, calmed his thoughts, and he reached up to touch one of the buds. He couldn't quite believe that they were the beginnings of something that would one day be called. His fingers brushed the side of the vine, and there was a sudden burst of green as searing pain flashed through his hand and into his chest. Quinn cried out, dropping his hold on the plant and staggering backwards. Had something bitten him? He closed his eyes against the wave of dizziness, then opened them to look down at his hand, bracing himself for it to be red or swollen. Instead, the birthmark on his hand was glowing, pulsing with the same green light that moved beneath the ground. Quinn stopped breathing. He must be imagining it. He rubbed his eyes with his other hand, his throat tightening when the glow didn't disappear. He looked up at Ali, who was looking at him. She was staring at the plant. Quinn followed her gaze, his chest constricting. A new tendril was pushing up out of the vine, and as Quinn stared, a new fruit budded and expanded until it was as big as the others, as though it had always been there, as though for months had happened in a single instant. I knew it, Ali whispered. Knew what? Said Quinn. He felt like he was falling. What just happened? He stared at his hand, where the burning sensation was fading to a dull throb. He looked at Ali, then back up at the vine, where the buds were now small passion fruit. Did that just grow? While we were watching? Quinn rubbed his eyes again. It did, said Allie. There was something in her voice, a thread of excitement. She turned to Quinn. Do you have any idea what this means? What? Quinn asked, staring at her in disbelief. How would I have any idea what it means? I was hoping you'd be able to help me with calling, but this is a whole different thing. Allie studied the plant, lightly touching the new fruit. We'll have to keep it to ourselves, she muttered. I don't want to get anyone's hopes up. Are you going to tell me what's going on? Asked Quinn, trying to keep his voice level. He constantly felt like the ground was shifting beneath him, turning everything he knew on its head. In Orbis, he didn't have control, but there was a strange familiarity in the instability. He knew that there were things his mother wouldn't tell him, and there was always the hope of the library to retreat to if he wanted answers, or his notebook if he wanted solace. He knew the parameters of how everything worked. Here, he had no idea what any of it meant. Allie looked at him. Sorry, she said to Quinn, and he could hear her excitement. The burning in his stomach rose at the sound. It's just the first time there's been real possibilities, she said. Allie, will you please tell me what you're talking about? The words burst out of him, his fear and frustration adding volume. Allie swiveled her head around the field, searching, then back to Quinn. What are you doing? She hissed. Why are you yelling? And that was it. He snapped. Why am I yelling? He shouted. I passed a test I should have failed. I was called to a place I had no idea existed, told that my people, my family, are stealing from the other side of the world. And I just touched a plant that made my hand feel like it was on fire, and then it grew a new fruit while I watched. Wouldn't you be yelling? Quinn choked on the last words. Allie just looked at him. What was the test? But Quinn couldn't take it. He felt like he was going to explode. He needed to get away, to be by himself. Give me a minute, he told Allie. He turned and walked away, part of him registering that it was the first time he'd ever walked away from someone in anger, part of him all too aware of Allie following a pace behind. So he ran. He ran until his chest ached, and was glad of it, because at least this was an ache he could control. The sky was getting brighter now, the sun lighting up the land as it rose. In the distance, Quinn could see figures emerging as the day began in earnest. He kept running, knowing that it was probably stupid. Who cared? He didn't know where he was running to, but his hand was still throbbing. He was confused and frustrated and overwhelmed. But as the run burned away those things, there was also part of him that felt anticipation, like he was on the verge of discovering something about himself, something wonderful, something real. He ran along the ridge, feeling the slight shift of the soil beneath his feet, following the green lines until somewhere along the way he stopped feeling like he was running away from something. Now he was sure he was running towards something, like his body was being driven by instinct. He stopped when the rocks beside him grew larger, bending forward and panting, his breath misting the cool morning air. Allie pulled to a stop beside him, and with grim satisfaction, Quinn noticed that she was struggling to breathe as well. They stood for a moment, both recovering. Everything I've ever known is a lie, said Quinn, finally admitting out loud the truth that had been building up inside him since he'd arrived. I didn't ask to be here, but I am here now, and I want to understand. I need you to help me do that. Allie nodded. I'm sure I didn't answer your questions. I'm sorry I didn't answer your questions, she said. It's easy to get caught up. She studied Quinn, an openness to her face that he couldn't close himself off to. It's okay, said Quinn. Thank you. She looked out over the fields, catching her breath. All my life, Avantra has existed to serve Ellipsom, she said, and every time there's hope that there might be another way, it dies. She looked at the tall tower. An almost imperceptible shudder ran through her. I was 9 when Mum disappeared, she said. She had been collecting extra food from the fields to give to the families nearby who had more children under working age than they could feed. Management classed it as a rebellion. They came to our house and they took her. She shook her head like she was shaking off the memory. Sometimes I think our family carries the guilt of the ellipson blood running in our veins. She wiped her eyes, and Quinn could see the anguish in them, and the fear that she fought to keep concealed. His heart hurt both for her loss and for her burden. He didn't let himself think about his own mother, lurking in the shadow of his thoughts. "Your hand," Allie said. "I think you are what we would call vine-touched." At Quinn's look, Allie sighed. "It is easier if I show you," she said. "Luckily you led us right where we need to be." She shot Quinn a wry grin. She pointed to the rocks beside them, then knelt down and reached underneath the side of one of the rocks. Quinn heard a faint click, and a moment later, the rock swung up. Another trapdoor. Quinn swallowed, trying to temper the strange joy he could feel rising inside him. "Can I go first?" he asked Allie, his heart thudding as his hand started tingling again. Allie nodded, and Quinn climbed inside. There were a few steps of darkness, and then he emerged into a tunnel that sparkled with green light, as though thousands of green gems had been embedded in the soil. Without turning back to ask Allie, he headed toward the source of the light. Moments later he came to an abrupt stop, his heart clenching in wonder at the open cavern before him. His breath caught. The cavern was such a bright and vivid green that Quinn could barely see. He shielded his face, the light on his hand dancing in response. When his eyes adjusted, he saw that the room was almost entirely taken up by what looked like a massive, glowing tree trunk. Offshoots of green spilled out in every direction, wrapping their way around the walls and then disappearing into the soil. Through it all, green light rippled, so smooth that it looked like water, and something about the patterns. Quinn felt a strange sense of déjà vu. "What is this?" whispered Quinn, unable to tear his gaze away. "This is the vine," Allie answered softly from beside him. "A vine?" Quinn half laughed in disbelief, unable to tear his gaze away from the rippling light. "This is not a vine." "Not a vine," said Allie, and Quinn heard the answering laughter in her voice. "The vine." "Like with a capital V?" asked Quinn. He was partly talking to distract himself. He knew. To stop himself from pressing his hand against it and watching to see if green raced over him and through him. "Like with a capital V," said Allie gently. "Sure, makes sense," Quinn muttered, unable to stop himself from moving closer. His body screamed at him to touch it, to let himself be consumed by the green, but he held back. As he neared, he could see tiny black lines scoring parts of the trunk, as though the strands had been burned. Allie came to stand beside him, touching one of the black lines. "There are caverns like this across Avantra," said Allie, "where you can access these trunks of the vine. They're all interconnected. The vine runs through the whole of the continent. A few years ago we noticed that some of the fields were yielding less than they used to, and some stopped growing things altogether. That's when we found the black strands. Every year there are more." She turned to look at Quinn. "It's dying," she told him. "Some people think..." She took a breath. "They think at one point the vine ran through the entire planet, until it died off on ellipson hundreds of years ago. And if the current rate of calling continues, if Avantra keeps having to provide for both continents, we're worried that it will die off here too." Somehow her words didn't come as a surprise. Still, Quinn found he was overcome by a deep sense of mourning. "What is vine-touched?" he asked. He couldn't get the words out of his head. "There are stories," said Allie hesitantly as Quinn looked back to the vine, "of Avantrans over the years who were born with a special connection to the vine, who had the ability to make things grow at will, to cause plants to bear fruit and vegetables in an instant. In the stories, the Avantrans, they used offshoots of the vine to make all sorts of new things, to mend things. As they used it, The vine drew strength from their interactions. Those interactions were what helped give it life and, in turn, it gave life to Avantra. Quinn kept his gaze fixed straight ahead. Those Avantrans were called vine-touched, she whispered. Quinn could feel her watching him. She took a deep breath. I haven't heard of anyone being vine-touched in my lifetime. It's believed that the gene has faded out, and with Ellipsom constantly taking things, and no vine-touched people to give the vine life, we've feared that it will just slowly continue to die, until Avantra becomes like Ellipsom. And after that, what happens to the world? Quinn closed his eyes, but even when he did, he could still see the vine glowing behind his eyelids. You think I can heal the vine? Said Quinn, piecing together her earlier comments. I do, said Ellie. I'm not from Avantra, said Quinn. How could I be vine-touched? Ellie hesitated. I'm not sure, but I've never seen anyone do what you did with the plant just then. Quinn met her eyes. He needed time. He needed to think it all through. How long do we have here? He asked Ellie. I don't know, she said. We should go before the fields get too busy. They were silent as they made their way back through the tunnels. With every step, Quinn could feel the vine pulling at him, drawing him back in. They stepped out into the open again. Quinn blinked, his eyes adjusting to the shift in light. Even though it was still early in the day, the sunlight felt stark after the glow of the vine. He looked out at the fields to see that Ellie had been right. There were already more people there than had been earlier. A familiar cry pierced the air, and Quinn jerked his head upward, scanning the sky. A rhinodrite soared above them, wings extended, casting a silhouette across the land. The land seemed to shimmer as it flew across the green tendrils stark against the soil. Quinn felt a sense of calm steal over him at the sight. A rhinodrite, he whispered, watching as it landed on an empty field and 3 people slid down. You've seen one before? Asked Ellie, watching him carefully. Quinn cleared his throat. There are a few on Ellipsom, he said, thinking of Dawn. Of course, said Ellie, shaking her head. That's why there are fewer than there used to be. I should have known. But there were 3 people on it. It was nice to think of something apart from the vine he felt pulsing steadily beneath his feet. Ellie looked at him curiously. What do you mean? In Ellipsom, only the strongest callers can call them, said Quinn, and they have to call them by name, which is practically impossible. Once they do, they are the only ones who the rhinodrite will allow near them. But as he spoke, Quinn wondered at the truth of his words. Had his mother been lying about that too, to maintain control? He shook the questions aside, knowing there was little chance of him understanding the inner workings of his mother's plans. The rhinodrites are born with a connection to the land, said Ellie, as they both watched one of the men loop a rein around the rhinodrite's neck and begin leading it down the field. It kept its head down, horn digging deep into the soil. It was ploughing, Quinn realized. From where they stood, he could see the ground beginning to shift, the glowing green moving closer to the surface. The fewer rhinodrites there are, the less fertile the soil. The other fields were getting busier too. Quinn could see people picking up tools and walking along the rows. Quinn's gaze drifted toward the road they'd walked past earlier. He wondered what had happened to the passion fruit he'd touched, whether it had grown any bigger since they'd been underground. Any requests on where we go next, Quintus? Asked Ellie lightly. Her eyes twinkled, and Quinn suspected she knew exactly which direction his feet were itching to go. He met her eyes. Quinn, he said, finally feeling something shift inside him. Call me Quinn. They kept their heads down, sticking to the side of the ridge to avoid attracting attention. Quinn could hear murmurs and soft laughter floating on the air as they passed the first field. It was strange to listen to people going about their day, and knowing that on the other side of the world people in Ellipsom were completely oblivious to the existence of an entire society. To know that he had been, just the day before. His heart beat faster as they neared the field from earlier, and he quickened his pace. On one level, he understood that his being vine-touched was an impossibility, but on the other, he seemed to have grown a plant simply by touching it. Curiosity and nerves bubbled inside him at the thought of seeing it again, and confirming that he hadn't just imagined it. He didn't know what to do with everything Ellie had told him about the vine. He felt torn between two places. Two lives. Part of him felt like he should be trying to get back to Ellipsum so he could see the other side of things. Maybe he could talk to people, let them know that Avantra existed. But how could he not stay and help if he had the ability to? He thought again about Milo, knowing so clearly what he wanted. Quinn wished he had that certainty. They drew closer to the field, and Quinn realized there was a cluster of people gathered beside the plant he'd touched. Allie came to a stop, motioning for Quinn to do the same. "We need to leave it alone," an older man was saying. "If we give it time, it may bear even more fruit, and we can figure out what is giving it life. These have doubled in size since yesterday. What could be causing that?" "Just do your job," said the caller who was with him. "Pick the fruit." "Why would leaving it make a difference?" Quinn whispered to Allie. "It's impossible for something to be called while it's still growing," Allie replied quietly. "Anything still attached remains untouched. I think it's about the disconnection from the vine." The crop had grown even more in the mere hour they'd been underground. Not much, but enough that fruit was clearly more abundant in one section. "Surely it can't hurt to leave it for a day," a younger voice joined the conversation, and Quinn saw a boy about his age step forward to stand beside the man. "Are you questioning my orders?" The caller's voice sliced through the air. "I apologize, sir," said the boy, but even Quinn could hear that he didn't mean it. He could sense Allie's tension, and they crept closer to see that the older man and the boy had positioned themselves in front of the plant. A girl stood just off to the side, looking up at the passion fruit. The caller tried again to move the man aside, but he refused to budge. "Please?" Quinn could hear the man begging, desperation lacing his words. "You don't understand. This could—" "I don't understand?" The caller's voice was cold. "It seems to me that it is you who does not understand." Quinn felt Allie freeze beside him, and a sense of foreboding crept over him, even before she spoke. "You need to get away from here," she said. "Now, do you remember the way back?" Her eyes were bright with worry. Allie started pushing him away, back in the direction of her cave. Quinn didn't want to be in the way, but he wouldn't just leave her if she was in danger. "What are you going to do?" he asked, digging his heels in. "I don't know," said Allie, her voice catching, "but once Demetrius gets passionate about something, he's hard to shift. I might be able to help." "Let me help too," said Quinn. "This was because of me. There must be something I can do." Allie looked up at him, her eyes searching. Finally, she nodded and started to turn back to the field. Then they heard the caller's voice rise. Allie spun around, and a moment later a bright yellow light flashed from the grey tower on the horizon, lighting the sky. Quinn watched in horror as the old man and his companions crumpled to the ground. The caller stepped away from them. "Pick this fruit," he directed the closest onlookers before continuing on down the field. Quinn held his breath until the caller was out of earshot. There was a strange ringing in his ears, and his head spun at the swift, violent resolution of the problem. He couldn't quite believe what had just happened. "What was that?" he breathed, feeling Allie shake beside him. "That was management," she said. She turned away, and Quinn could see her trying to steel herself. "They'll be okay," she said. It sounded as though she was reassuring herself as much as Quinn. "They're just stunned." "What will happen to them?" asked Quinn. "Normally they're left there for the day and have to make up the time overnight. If they don't manage to pick their quota by morning, their family and their neighbors will miss out on food rations." Quinn thought of the Spurges, of council encouraging neighbors to report on each other. He could imagine his mother He could imagine his mother would like things like quotas. He felt sick. Quinn looked over at the people sprawled out on the ground. A few others had joined together to move their bodies into the shade. "That's my fault," he said. "If I hadn't touched the plant, it wouldn't have happened." "No," said Ali fiercely, spinning to face him. "That is the fault of the man who chose to fire on them, not you." "Is there anything we can do?" Quinn asked. Ali shook her head, biting her lip. "Not without causing more problems," she said, her eyes shadowed. "Hopefully they'll wake by evening." They made their way back to the cave. Ali was quiet for the first time since they'd set out that day. He wondered how many times she'd seen the tower used, whether she'd had that happen to her. He thought about the emotion in her voice whenever she described what was happening to her continent, and he felt like he might be starting to understand the threat of excitement in her voice whenever she spoke about calling. "Why do you want to call things?" he asked her as they neared the top of the ridge that led to her cave. Ali gazed into the distance. When she finally answered, her voice was soft. "Earlier this year, one of my friends was stunned by management twice in 1 week. She still has a limp from the fall, and because she can't work as hard as she used to, her food allowance is lower. Last week, Demetrius cooked an anniversary dinner for his wife and half of it disappeared before they could eat it. 5 years ago, my mother's favorite chair went missing. Do you see what I'm getting at?" Ali's eyes shone bright with unshed tears as she looked at him. "We have no control over any of it. We do what we can, but it's not enough. It is never enough. My father has spent my life hoping that I wasn't a caller because he worries about what management will do if they find out. I haven't even told him about it yet, but when I discovered that I am, I was glad of it, because I'm going to take back what is ours, Quinn." Quinn felt his breathing catch at the passion in her voice. He cleared his throat. He couldn't stop thinking about the crumpled bodies at the edge of the field, and how helpless he'd felt when they'd fallen. "Are there callers at the fields at night?" he asked, an idea starting to form at the edge of his mind. Ali frowned and shook her head. "They'll just leave a few tools for Demetrius, Lewis and Maya, then come back to check in the morning. If the work hasn't been done, or if they or any of the tools are missing, their family and neighbors will face the consequences." Quinn processed her words before taking a breath and making a decision. "Have you called anything apart from paper?" he asked tentatively. "Ender person?" Ali snorted. "I haven't had much free time since yesterday," she said, raising her eyebrows at him. "The paper and me. We come from Ellipsum," said Quinn. "And even though Ellipsum doesn't grow much, there are tools there. Gardening tools." Quinn couldn't believe he was suggesting stealing, but the tools were rarely used. They were unlikely to be missed. Ali's eyes flew to Quinn's. There was a light sparking in hers, and he saw that she understood his meaning. "From what I know, calling is mostly about intent," said Quinn. "I don't think you have any shortage of that." Ali took a breath and nodded. Quinn smiled. "I'd start by holding out your hand."